2024. And we have one more agency to hear from. Oh, roll call, absolutely.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Larson. Here. Representative Sherwood. Here. Representative Stiff.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Zwanitzer Dave.
Here.
Senator Anderson.
Excused.
Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Nethercott. Senator Salazar.
Here.
Co-Chairman Nicholas. Here. Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum for purposes of per diem. Representative Alaman.
Present.
Representative Angelos.
Here.
Representative Harrelson. Representative Pennegraph.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Senator Driscoll. Senator Larson. Senator-elect Smith.
Here.
Co-Chairman Bear.
Here.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody, and in particular, welcome to the members of the incoming Joint Appropriations Committee. I see that your attendance has fallen off just a little bit, but we're down to the hardcores here now. We're in the home stretch. We've gone through a lot of agency hearings. We have one more agency today, which is the Attorney General's office. Once their presentation is complete, we will open up for questions from members of the committee, and then incoming members will have a chance for questions, and then we will proceed to public comment. Now, that's public comment on just, I think, on all of the agency presentations we heard so far. Once public comment is closed, we'll proceed with any agency callbacks or additional agencies. Then we will receive letters from elected officials and the judiciary, wrap up any other business before adjourning at 9:15. Okay, maybe not. Let's begin with the AG's office. AG Hill, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the Joint Appropriations Committee, thank you for having me here today. My name is Bridget Hill. I am the Wyoming Attorney General. I am joined today by my Chief Deputy, Ryan Schellhaus, and my CFO, Steve Winders. They have joined me here today at the table. We're here today just with one supplemental request for you to consider. Today we're here to request $509,786, and that amount represents two positions within the Attorney General's office. We have asked for those in what we would call HB 300 attorneys. For those of you wondering what that might be, those are the attorneys in my office responsible for federal natural resource account litigation. You did very much. You did some of that work.
AG Hill, if I may, just very quickly, is that a 15-month number, an annual or a biennial?
Mr. Chairman, that is a 15-month number. And if you break it down into the amount that's been biennialized and the amount that is one time, the amount biennialized is $408,007, and the amount of one time is $101,777.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and if you're wondering what salary that represents, for the two positions, that would be approximately $150,000.
Okay.
We hope to employ what we would call in the Attorney General world, the classification scheme P5s. That would be our top classification. That would be for experts, people who have been in the members of the bar and been in the practice of law for over 10 years. And those are the types of attorneys we're hoping to attract with those salaries. We have a few of those in our office currently, and we definitely consider them experts in our office. With regard to the type of litigation that they were doing, though, we call those, again, HB 300. That moniker comes from a House bill that was passed in 2003, which amended the Federal Natural Resource Policy Act, and I call that FNRPA. So that amended FNRPA to allow for this type of litigation, which is litigation regarding natural resources in the state and often protecting the interests of the state of Wyoming regarding their natural resources. So those would be things like rule contests to the EPA. Those would be things like contests to what is getting a lot of news right now, range management plan amendments. Those would be things like Endangered Species Act. So over time, when those cases first started back when we received those positions in 2003, we had a handful of cases. And over time, the caseload regarding these types of cases has gone up. In 2015, we had approximately 24 cases handled by our two HB 300 attorneys. In 2023, that caseload had risen to 40, and in 2024, we're at 55. And we just see that type of litigation escalating, and so we're here to request additional 2 attorneys to help us handle that caseload.
Mr. Chair.
Representative
Lloyd.
well, first, and then Representative Stith, sorry.
So, General Hill, it's nice to see you, and you have had your hands full. I'm curious to, maybe you can give us a little summary on that as we get, before you leave diocese. But when I read this, I was taken back to last year's budget where we fund out of the FNRPA fund an attorney for the county to represent that. But is that not in your office? It's not in your office. So clarify that so that we don't get it confused.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, thank you for that question, because I want to be very clear about this, because there is occasionally confusion about this, and there is some sensitivity about it. The only FNRPA funding the FNRPA funding that my agency receives is only used for what I would call litigation expenses. Salaries for our attorneys are handled through my budget, and that is why you see me making this request today just through my standard budget. The attorney you are speaking of is not funded through my office. The FNRPA account is handled by the governor's office, and we request funding from that the same as any other agency might request funding from that, the same as counties and local governments would request from that. But the attorney that was funded for the county commissioners is funded through the FNRPA account, which is in the governor's office. And I just, to make very clear, when I say litigation expenses, because again, there is some sensitivity about this, and there has been confusion about it. When I talk about litigation expenses, it's not my attorney's salaries. Those would be things like filing fees. Those would be travel to cases that are outside the state. And one of the bigger expenses would be when we are in jurisdictions that are not Wyoming and that we are not licensed in. We do have to hire local counsel to pro hoc us into those jurisdictions. And so those are primarily the expenses you will see us use from that actual account. But we tie these positions to FNRPA because that's like what gave the authorization for us to enter into these kind of cases and really do this sort of litigation.
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, Attorney General Hill, these are sort of your troops that you use to fight the federal government when we have this war on the West. And you've done a great job of that. During the Biden administration, every day you wake up, you have to file a new lawsuit against whatever the federal government has been doing. Now that war of the West should be winding down, I would think. So can you address why, when the war is winding down, that you would need additional troops now?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, 2 things. Obviously, when we saw the need to request these attorneys, the election was not determined yet, obviously. But second, I would say you would think, and logically, it would seem like the war is winding down. What we've found over time, though, is our caseload doesn't actually go down all that much with the change in administration. What happens is we end up in, for lack of a better term, switching sides. So what happens when there is an administration change, and we saw this in the first Trump term, the federal government then, even though they do take actions and their policies align more with the policies of the state of Wyoming, they then get sued by other states. So you're more Democratic if we're talking about a Republican administration, your states that are more Democratic in nature and a lot more environmental groups, and they get sued by those, and we end up joining those suits or intervening in those suits to still defend Wyoming's interests and policies in those suits. And you wonder, well, couldn't the federal government do a good enough job, Bridget? Are you needed in those suits, I think would be the next logical question that follows that. And we found over time we are. So even though you have an administration that more closely aligns with the policies we would like to see in Wyoming, they're not exactly lockstep. And sometimes, though, even though the administration is friendly to the state of Wyoming, the decisions that they make do not fully align with the decisions that we would like to see in the state of Wyoming. And we're there as a voice to make sure that our voice is heard for the differences that we have between those. So again, logically, you would think our caseload would go down, and it might a little, but our history is it didn't decrease significantly. We just ended up on the other side of the V.
Follow-up? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General Hill, and I look forward to working with you in this war on the West. And thank you for that explanation of what you anticipate in the future. My question is, these types of cases seem very complicated and specialized in that we're having to go, hopefully, to the Supreme Court to get a final decision on these things. What is your thinking as far as not hiring outside counsel versus inside counsel to take these all the way to the finish line?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, I have a couple lines of thought with that. Let me start with this. I would put the attorneys in my office up against anybody. This is the work that they do, and they really are experts at this type of work, this administrative review, APA work. And so I would put them up against anybody. And so I want to be very clear that my request for 2 additional attorneys, I say it in a country way because I'm a country girl, is a request not for better horses, it's for more horses. I think we have some really fine attorneys in my office, and I really would put them up against anybody else. But my second point would be, when we think about the state of Wyoming and the budget that we try to keep smaller, it's terribly expensive to hire outside attorneys. And you would see states across the nation expending significantly more funds than we do than the salaries that you would see here. For instance, I know it's been in the paper that we did hire outside counsel for the Buffalo RMP contest. And we did that in part because, again, we needed more horses, not better horses, but we did go out and find some very, very good attorneys for that. But we needed more horses because of the workload that we had, and we knew how big that case was going to be, and we simply did not have enough attorneys to throw at it. But if you look at what the contract price that we will pay in that contract, which is publicly available, we will pay $775 an hour for partner time, and we will pay $595 for an hour for associate work. And and the comparison's not exactly straight apples to apples here, because my people are working more than 40 hours a week. That's what I've got my people working. But if you were to say, because they're on salary, they're not getting paid for the extra hours, they're on salary, even though they're committing to those extra hours. So I just did a quick calculation, and I recognize, as you will, that that's not a great comparison, Bridget. But if you do that, take their salaries, the 150, that say they're working 40 hours a week, that's just the typical week, and you do that by 52 weeks in the year, what you end up with is around $73 an hour. So in terms of cost efficiency, you have tremendous savings by keeping that work in-house. And so it's one, I think we have the quality attorneys that can do these cases, and I think they do them well. Two, there's cost efficiencies there. The third thing I would factor into that is our ability to partner with other states, like-minded states that have similar problems. Once you start hiring outside attorneys, you can still partner with those, but it partners better if you're keeping that work in-house because they're like-minded states, and then you get some cost efficiencies that way too.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that response, General Hill. I guess I would ask, have you thought about the nimbleness of being, I understand the cost, but then you're able to respond, as Representative Stith said, you know, we may not have as much in the future due to the changes in the administration. And I appreciate your response that, you know, it could be that we're on the other side, but that need to be nimble. Would you be more nimble with inside counsel that maybe specialize in one particular area versus the area that we don't know where these lawsuits are going to come from? And you'd be able to hire that outside counsel to be specifically trained or experienced in that particular issue. Is there a value to nimbleness by hiring outside counsel?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, I would say even though what we've experienced is even though the issues themselves, the regulation you're challenging differ, what is consistent throughout is the type of challenge that it is. It is almost always an APA challenge or an Endangered Species Act challenge or a FLTMA challenge. And so that is consistent throughout. So the nimbleness in terms of expertise doesn't really go with that. Even when we hire outside counsel, we are hiring somebody to do that type of work, an APA challenge, a FLTMA challenge, an endangered species challenge, a NEPA challenge. And so the work is consistent, even though the regulations itself are changing. The work is very much consistent. And so I don't see the need there necessarily for nimbleness in terms of expertise about something different. The base work and the base law that we are challenging them under is almost always the same.
Follow up, Representative Bear? Okay, Representative Larson.
General Hill, kind of following that same line of thought, could you explain to us how you use the resources of other states that helps provide that nimbleness? Because it appears to me that there's some states that have more expertise in some areas, even though they're the same issues. West Virginia seems to master coal issues. You seem to master air quality and endangered species issues. But is there that collaboration between like states, does that help provide nimbleness and expertise in that collaboration?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I would say our collaboration, I don't know if nimbleness is the word I would use, but what you find is like-minded states that are impacted by these issues and have to regulate within their own state, right? So let's say you had primacy from the EPA on certain issues. You find them practicing in that field enough that they just know the language better, right? They understand how the processes work better. And so maybe that is nimbleness. I don't know if that's the word I would use, but they become experts in that way because they're so familiar with it. And you're right, West Virginia is, and it's the importance they place on them within their state. West Virginia places a tremendous amount of importance on coal, as does Wyoming, right? And there are various regulations that go along with coal, so air, water, land quality. And so I think what you find is our collaborations with those states, we find states that are working in those areas of the law all the time. And so they become experts in that way. Now, some of them don't have a lot of staff, so I want to be very upfront that they don't have a lot of staff handling that and hire outside counsel as well on occasion. But West Virginia uses a lot of their own work as well.
Thank you, and I guess I should have elaborated. Oftentimes we hear, why isn't our Attorney General taking the lead on this? Why isn't our Attorney General taking the lead on Y and Z? When in fact, depending on the expertise of the various states, it seems like you defer to sometimes them to take the lead because of their experience, or they defer to you to take the lead. Am I saying that accurately?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think that would be very accurate. And let me just clarify one thing too. Not taking the lead doesn't mean we're not a full participant, because I think there is some misconception out there about that if I haven't taken the lead on a case, that I'm not a full participant, I'm not interested, I'm not doing enough work related to that. When you become a party to that case, you come with full party obligations. We are doing the work of a full party. We simply weren't leading the coalition in terms of lining up the evidence and the affidavits that we have to do, responding. Those cases come with discovery obligations as well. Those cases come with all the obligations of a full party participant. Traditionally, there are some issues, and if I'm saying it the same, I think I'm saying it the same way, that state feels like they need to be the lead state because of its importance to them and all the work that they've done on that. And that's not to say that those cases are not important to me as well, but some people feel very strongly about that. And so they want to have their name first on the list. When you list the attorneys, they otherwise go alphabetical. So I'm always last on that list if I'm not a lead state. And so maybe it looks like I'm not a full participant because they otherwise go alphabetical. But we are full participants as a party if we've intervened in a suit. I want to make it very clear, amicus is something else. You don't come with party obligations.
Follow up, Representative Larson? Nope. Representative Stith, and then Representative Bear.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted the Attorney General to know that I'm going to have time on my hands, and for the steeply discounted rate of $400 an hour, I'd be happy to take $400,000 off her hands.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate it. We're always looking for good attorneys.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Hill, you said that these other states that take the lead may feel strongly about presenting themselves and making it clear to the world that they do feel strongly about this. Are there things that the state of Wyoming should feel strongly about and should indicate to the outside world that we are really concerned about these issues on behalf of the state?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, I think so. I will say the ones that oftentimes make sense for us to take the lead on are ones within our state as well. So you will see us take lead on ones, our RMPs, right? Our coal, our oil and gas leasing that is within our state. So there are those instances. I do believe my personal philosophy is you can show your importance or the importance of the topic to you, not by necessarily having your name first. My personal philosophy doesn't necessarily track that. As long as you are a full participant in that case, following it and participating in writing the law, shaping the law, and when I say the law, I mean the briefs and the law that we are going to present. To me, having your name first is not as high of importance to us. But is there something to be said about saying, these cases, we will take the lead? Yes. And if we have additional attorneys, I think we would be able to do a little more of that.
All right, anyone else? Please continue.
You were talking to me, I'm sorry. Please continue. So our request is that $509,786 for these 2 additional attorneys in our office to handle this type of litigation. I think all the comments that I had thought that I would otherwise make have been addressed through the questions in terms of why this is important to the state of Wyoming, why we were looking for attorneys in-house, and the type of challenges that we would expect to continue to see even with the change in administration. So with that, I would stand for additional questions unless
Okay.
somebody needed additional information.
Anything further? Oh, Don.
Mr. Chairman, just for the incoming committee's clarification, as indicated by Attorney General Hill, the request that is printed in your book has been reduced by $16,792. I just wanted to make that clarification. I believe she indicated the file number was 509,786.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hill, can you just explain that reduction in the cost, just so we have an understanding? Thank you.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bear, we had a small mathematical error in the fringe benefit calculation. I'm not going to pretend to you that I actually know how that calculation works out. Somebody else does that for me. I say the salary I would like to pay, and then a fringe calculation is done, and we had a small mathematical error related to that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
that error was done by the State Budget Department, and it had to do with the calculation of 15 months to do the supplemental. We found it and we've corrected it.
Okay, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is that's across all 3 of those positions, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, anything else? All right, well, Senator Nethercott.
Randomly, Mr. Hibbard, is health insurance included as part of the fringe benefit cost?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and if you'd like more detail on that, I'll provide it.
I would.
When you do the calculation for benefits, you always have to remember that EGI is a fixed cost, because once you pay it for an employee, we don't have to add any more money to it. The fringe benefit nature comes in on percentages like FICA, retirement, workers' comp, unemployment. That's what we make those changes on as a percentage to a salary.
I may be preoccupied with the statutory definition of compensation and fringe benefits, as opposed to how you calculate total cost of an employee. It's really driving at a legal question, seeking an answer for how the state calculates the legal definition of fringe benefits as part of a compensation calculation, and wondering if the state considers health insurance costs a fringe benefit.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you on the definition of this. What it is if you think about fringe benefits, you could think about a lot of different things in the private sector. What we're discussing here is simply employees' group insurance, retirement, unemployment, workers' compensation, 0.6% for retirees' insurance, those items that we fund on a position.
Follow-up? No? Anything else? All right.
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Attorney
could I
General Hill.
just add to that too? Fringe is just a shorthand I have been using, Senator Nethercott. I don't think I necessarily meant to imply that was the legal definition of fringe. It would probably be more accurate for me to call it additional benefits in addition to salary. That's just the shorthand Calamity Jane, right? And so that's just the shorthand I've been using, and I didn't mean to imply that.
Anything else? All right, thank you. Thanks to you and your crew. Keep up the good work, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your time here today.
Find my agenda. Where the hell did I put that agenda? it's here somewhere. All right. We will now open up for public comment on the budget, on any aspect of this supplemental budget that we've heard over the last several days. Is there anybody from the public here in the room that wishes to comment? Come forward. Okay, how about online? Anybody online?
I believe we have one person online, Mr. Paul Vogelheim.
All right.
Mr. Vogelheim?
Good morning. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
We can, if you state your full name, and then if you're affiliated, representing an organization of any kind, just let us know about that so we can fully understand. And welcome and good morning.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of this committee, and thank you all for your many years of dedicated and impactful service. I'm Paul Vogelheim. I'm a past county commissioner and founder of the Jackson Cupboard back in 2020 or 2003, and current member of 122 Board of Directors. I've been involved the last 20 years in battling in the food insecurity in Teton County, and also plugged into hearing about this plague throughout our state. I'm speaking today to support the supplemental funding needed for DFS to deliver Sunbucks, the SEPBD program for our kids' summer meals. As a commissioner, we were always challenged with many citizens' wants and needs, but critical health and safety issues always took priority, and children going hungry has to be a priority. Our nonprofits and local agencies are not able to keep up with the growing food and meal demands, and a greater team approach, including increased state and DFS help, would be critical at this point. DFS gave an impressive presentation at your meeting on Wednesday, confirmed that they're ready to take this on, and have shown that they can deliver critical services timely and, most importantly, efficiently, as they sure did with the emergency rental assistance program that they provided during COVID-19. So I ask your consideration to add funding back into the DFS budget for the Sunbucks implementation, and to include this in your supplemental budget. And thank you, and I stand for any questions, Mr. Chair.
Co-chair.
Okay, Mr. Co-chair, apologize.
Hi, Paul. This is Bob Nicholas. I just wanted to say hello. How are you?
Hey, Bob, good to see you up there. How are you?
Hope you have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you, you too.
Anyone else? Anyone else? All right, Mr. Volkheim, thank you. And then we have somebody else online.
Linda Barton.
All right, Ms. Martin, welcome. State your full name and any organization that you're representing so we can fully understand your testimony. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of this committee. Thank you for considering the summer EBT supplemental funding today. This funding is vital to our children and families struggling with food insecurity. My name is Linda Barton, and I'm the retired director and founder of the Wyoming After School Alliance and the Lights on and Lander After School and Summer programs. With 20 years of experience in the after school field, working with hundreds of children K through 12, summer was critical regarding learning loss for low-income children. This is when kids fall through the cracks. Part of that is inconsistent meals, affecting learning and growth. I have seen it many, many times. Funding this program will expand children's access to healthy food beyond specific locations and times offered through the SUN program. Sunbucks fills that gap. It's also an economic consideration from a cost to benefit analysis. This investment in our children and youth now offsets the cost of remediation at a much higher cost in the future, and it helps working families be more productive, meaning that parents will be able to be more productive at the workplace if they're not worried about their children and how they're surviving. I urge you to support the additional funding to DFS's budget to implement the SunBucks into your supplemental budget. I think it's very, very important. Feeding our children is probably the most important aspect of the work that we do. And thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, and I will answer any questions that you might have.
Representative Larson.
Morning, Linda.
Hi, Mr. Larson. How are you?
Good. How's the weather today?
Beautiful.
Good. I'm
You need
headed
to be
that way.
back in Lander soon.
Yeah, I'll be headed that way. So just to reiterate for the members of this committee and what you're asking, that the request that you're referring to is not currently in the DFS supplemental budget. And what you're requesting is that as we move forward with the supplemental budget, we consider putting that in the agency supplemental budget. Do I have that correct?
Yes, sir, you do.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else for Ms. Martin? All right. Nothing else. Thank you very much for your time and attention, Ms. Martin, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too. Thank you very much.
Anyone else online? Okay, that closes public comment on the budget. Now, next item is agency callbacks and additions. Have we any, Don?
Mr. Chairman, you have one that remaining, the Stablecoin Commission, and I believe Director Anthony Apollo is here to present.
All right, thank you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Representative Larson.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think the members of the committee have received some emails from some of our colleagues concerning questions they had on the Stable Token Commission. You'll recall the new commission, first director in the history of Wyoming, way to go. And they've been busy working on trying to establish a blockchain contract this last year. And so Director Apollo, the questions that we have here is, through the course of this last year, you've set up a procedure for determining who the blockchain contract would be with. And so that RFP process was opened up to all vendors. And then there, in that process, there's a request for information. Then there's a qualification requirement, I believe, that you comply with. I don't know where we're at on that, but so a vendor would come in and, if he wanted to, ask for information. Then before you submit to the RFI, you're required to go through the pre-qualification component of it. Everyone would be welcome to submit that. The commission then would evaluate the qualifications of that person, determine whether they are qualified or not, and then they would move to submitting an RFP to complete that. The question that we've kind of received back is, it appears that there's been 9 blockchain people identified for the initial issuance. I may have that wrong, but it appears that way, but yet we're not through even on the pre-qualification process. So could you help us understand if the cart got in front of the horse, or how to ensure us that the RFP process, which the legislature finds to be fairly important, is being complied with?
Thank you. Through the chair, Representative Larson, I think what would be best for us is to take a few steps back.
If you could kick off with giving your name and the title and so forth.
Thank you,
that'd be
Chairman.
helpful.
Anthony Apollo, Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission, joined by
Chad Hour, Senior Policy Advisor, Governor Gordon.
So through the chair, Representative Larson, I think it would be best for us to take a few steps back and talk about how we've gotten through the procurement process in its totality. So going back to the budget session earlier this year, there was an amendment made to the Stable Token Act that allowed us to put forth our own rules around the procurement process. So the way it's rolled forward is there was a statutory amendment followed by the promulgation of emergency rules originally in July, and a second set passed in November. So we're currently under a second set of emergency rules regarding procurement up until March 20th of 2025. We do intend to submit the regular rules at our upcoming meeting this next Thursday of the commission. And taking a few steps ahead, one of the things we are including as an update in those rules is the ability to do rolling qualifications for both blockchains and vendors who are building on those blockchains. So we talked procurement, we talked rulemaking. We have not, to be very clear, kicked off an RFP process yet. Following the procurement and the rulemaking, our agency, through a technology subcommittee, set up a working group called Blockchain Selection. The goal of that working group was to assess the large number of blockchains that are available, come up with a defined quantity of them to assess in detail based on various criteria like market cap, privacy features, throughput, and then assess those with 25 quantitative criteria. The results of this exercise are posted publicly on our website. You can see the criteria, how we derive them. You can see the scoring for all of these. We assessed 28 different blockchains, and the criteria that were used to assess them included 5 binary criteria, which you had to have all 5 to be qualified for scoring. Those include things like being a public and permissionless network, but with permissioned onboarding so that we can make sure that anyone who's using a Wyoming stable token is not using it maliciously, having a transparent supply, on-chain analytics, and then importantly, a freeze and seize feature that would allow the Wyoming Stable Token Commission or any kind of law enforcement agency to stop the malicious use of a Wyoming stable token. 50% of the 28 blockchains we looked at got through that process. We went through a scoring process that included things like network stability, number of daily users, transaction throughput, existing stablecoin market capitalization, and whether or not they were domiciled in the state of Wyoming, as our budget did indicate that we should endeavor to work with companies that are in Wyoming. Further, there was an assessment of additional benefits, things like giving extra points for use cases on a given blockchain that were similar to what we intend to do. And then there was points deducted for any additional concerns, for example, network outage, or if there was any kind of legal concerns around the team building the blockchain or the blockchain itself and the activity it was facilitating. That then led us to finalize the scoring, at which point the working, I'm going to be very clear, the working group from the blockchain selection exercise scored and selected 5 layer 1 blockchains that would be brought forward. Those are Sui, Stellar, Avalanche, Ethereum, and Solana. The working group also identified 4 layer 2 blockchains that are built on top of these layer 1s, particularly on top of Ethereum. Those are Polygon, Arbitrum, Base, and Optimism. So the results were presented to the commission. The commission voted to adopt the criteria that were used for scoring and also the selection of the working group. So to be extremely clear, these blockchains are intended to be decentralized. You cannot give an RFQ or an RFP to Bitcoin. You can't give it to Ethereum. So this was meant as kind of a prelim to an RFQ process. We began our RFQ process for vendors. We have 7 RFQs that were put forth. They include things like token design, on-chain analytics, reserves management. That exercise started on November 20th and ended yesterday afternoon at 5 p.m. We received over 200 submissions. 140 of those were responses to the RFP. 60 of them were vendor submissions. We do intend to review those over the course of the next week, again, through this working group. We then intend to present the RFPs in totality to the commission on Thursday, And then once those RFPs are drafted and we have a qualified set of vendors, they will be invited to propose a book of work for the Stable Token Commission to build the token, all the supporting structures, the ongoing management thereof. And then that would be a process that runs from December 20th through January 30th. We would then look to finalize the selection of the vendors who would build the initial Wyoming stable token, and then we would build from there. I will quickly wrap by saying we do have a remit from the legislature to be a multi-chain offering in due time, and we do intend to do that. However, we have to start somewhere, and that's why we created this cohort of initial chains, we call them candidate blockchains, on which we may launch the first stable token. And I'm happy to stand for any questions beyond that.
Representative Larson again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the last part of your explanation, you indicated you're starting in a second round where you've had 200 submissions of people that want to be considered, if I understood you correct. And that makes sense to me. What I'm not understanding is this initial identification of 9, where, if I understand, and please correct me, it appears that you looked over the horizon of all of those people that do blockchain, and you selected the ones that should be, or did you accept applications, proposals, or, I mean, was everyone given a chance to be considered in that? How did you select these 9?
Through the chair, Representative Larson, again, I want to make a very clear distinction here between a blockchain, which is a decentralized piece of technology that no one in particular answers for, and vendor selection. The blockchain selection exercise was focused on looking at several dozen blockchains and saying these do or do not have the features that we need. That was not, to be very clear, because I've seen some news that I unilaterally made a decision here, this was done through a working group that included several commissioners, members of our agency, and subject matter advisors. And that's how we came up with this list of 9, which again was presented to the commission. The criteria were agreed by the commission, and the selection were agreed by the commission.
Please, Representative.
So I fully acknowledge ignorance, okay, on this. So a blockchain, if there was a blockchain, which is an entity, is that fair to say?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it depends on the chain. For example, Bitcoin has an anonymous creator called Satoshi Nakamoto. Some of these are created by foundations.
Sure, but for an old gray-haired guy that doesn't get this, let's call it an entity, just for this conversation. But you selected 9 entities out of this universe of blockchains. Did you allow blockchains to submit proposals for consideration, or did you just select them on your own?
Through the chair, Representative Larson, the point I'm trying to drive home is because blockchains are inherently decentralized, you can't reach out to them and ask them to do an RFP. You need to speak with the teams that are building on those chains for RFQs or RFPs. That's why there was this front-runner exercise to select open source technology that would allow us to then reach out to vendors building on top of that technology.
So then, follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
And so then, so I hope you understand my concern in what I'm trying to ensure is that we're allowing anyone who wants to be considered a blockchain the opportunity to do so, particularly if that exists in Wyoming. We want to make sure that they have that opportunity. Does this process impede that ability?
Through the chair, Representative Larson, I don't think it does. You know, we had a working group that looked at chains that had a specific background to them. And I want to be clear, these are chains where there was existing and demonstrable technology. We are aware of chains that are in Wyoming. We have reached out and spoken to private entities that are building some of these. And we feel that we've done a fair process in regards to reaching out to those and working alongside them to understand their qualifications and criteria.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your testimony so far. Also very interested, do you feel this process is, I know it's laborious, but it seems like the way you just spelled it out seems to be quite comprehensive. Do you feel that this RFP process that you're working through will ensure a qualified bid that is be at the best price?
Through the chair.
Mr. Paulo.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Yes, we do. We feel we've been very, very comprehensive. Again, all of the work that we've done has been put forth in a public forum. So if you wanted to see, for example, the 7 RFQs that we've put forward, the several, I think, 100 questions that are involved, they are again intended to assess the capabilities of vendors that are again building technology on these candidate blockchains that we put forth. And again, the RFQ process will be meant to tighten the funnel a bit, and then the RFPs that'll launch thereafter will be used to, again, that there's several hundred questions in all of those as well. Those will really allow us to assess the capabilities of any given firm. And again, these are multidimensional, right? There's one for token design, who's going to build the smart contract that issues the Wyoming stable tokens. There's one for the reserves management, who's going to be managing the dollars, buying the treasuries, rotating the repurchase agreements behind them. On-chain analytics, financial audit, internal controls, it's fairly comprehensive.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Please, Senator.
Thank you. I'm gratified to hear that. We've heard some conflicting testimony in the room here in the last couple of days about the quality of an RFP process. So it's good to hear your thoughts on that. Second, one of the big reasons why a lot of us voted for this, and one of the key drivers for getting approval, was to make sure, as the good Representative Larson was just talking about, making sure that local people, Wyoming people, get a chance to participate. Now, my understanding of your testimony right now is that through this process so far, you feel that's been achieved?
Mr. Paulo.
Through the chair, Senator Guru, the answer to that is yes. If you were to look at the blockchain selection criteria, we did give additional points for a Wyoming domicile. And we would expect that the evaluation criteria for the RFPs, which has not yet been approved by the commission, but we'd expect that to be on Thursday next week as well, would include that too. So I mentioned earlier, we promulgated a set of rules around our procurement process. If you were to look at those, you would see that the Wyoming domicile is included in there as well.
One final follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Please, Senator.
Thank you. One last question, Mr. Paulo. On that, I find it, just interesting that we've had now 2 sets of emergency rules. How are a full set of rules, a permanent set of rules coming? And second, what was the rationale, and walk me through just a little bit of why a second set? And was there a time frame in between the 2 where there were no rules, and were decisions made during that period?
Through the chair, Senator Guru, to be very clear, there were no determinations made or proposals sent or blockchain selection completed during the initial set of rules, emergency rules in place for the first 120 days. Again, I would ask to keep in mind that this was a one-man agency for a year. So there were changing priorities to a certain extent on a day-to-day basis regarding what had to get done. We had hoped that the team would have been brought together a bit earlier, and that would have allowed us to kick off the procurement process sooner rather than later. But with just the timeline we had, we've only onboarded the full team as of earlier this week. So we're now a team of 5. So we've been running concurrent processes between onboarding, procurement, rulemaking, design decisions. There's been a lot going on along parallel paths with a very small team that works very hard to get all this done.
Senator Grew, anything else?
Well, if I could, just a little bit more on that as far as the rule. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The rule timing, just want to make sure I'm clear on this, that you had a set of rules. Nothing was done during that first set of emergency rules. You brought on a second set of emergency rules. In between the 2, were there, did they fall right one fall on the other? Was there a gap in between? It seems to be, you hear things all over the place, and I don't understand most of it because I like some of our committee members are a little bit older, but, and a little fuzzy on some of this, but that's just a question I have, was all the rule making that's been done has been a continuous set of rules, emergency or otherwise, going through this process?
Through the chair, Senator Guru, thank you for the question. The first set of emergency rules and second set of emergency rules there were no differences between them. There was a gap of, I think, 2 or 3 days, not because of anything on our side, but because the Secretary of State's system was down on November 14th, which is when the rollover happened. Rather serendipitous that way. So that was one of the causes for a slight, 48, 72-hour gap. But beyond that, there wasn't any breach thereof. And again, I want to be specific. The rules are for the RFQs and the RFPs, which were launched after the adoption of the emergency rule set. And I will go one step further to specify the regular rules have not been submitted yet because, again, based on some of this feedback we've gotten just with vendor interest around what we're building, we do want to create a potential to have a rolling qualification process rather than a once-off effort. So we've looked at, for example, what the State Construction Department does in their rules. We are looking to integrate something similar to that to our regular rules. So when those are in place permanently, we have that capability to qualify on a rolling basis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Apollo, you said it was a one-man agency for a long time, but that's all you need if you got the right guy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take this as a compliment.
Absolutely. Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Apollo, thank you. I guess part of where I'm coming from and getting to is I'll start with the Wyoming domicile because that was my amendment. We fought pretty hard to put it in there. And I'd like to have you explain to me how you reached out, how you tried to work. One, how many Wyoming companies applied? And second, how did you reach out and work interactively with them to see that they had a honest, fair chance to be included?
Through the chair.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Nethercutt.
if I may ask the senator's question a different way,
Thank you. My lawyer will speak for me.
did you provide any disparate treatment to Wyoming companies versus other companies in order to make the bidding process arguably unfair?
Through the chair, Senator Driscoll and Senator Nethercutt, I think that's a bit of a loaded question there, but I do want to acknowledge that, again, when we provided the budget, we were given the explicit instruction to endeavor to work with Wyoming-based companies. Again, to be clear, and we're just going to go down this path now, to be clear, blockchains are typically decentralized. There is one that is based in Wyoming that is called Cardano. It's run by a company called Input Output Global, formerly Input Output Hong Kong. With this organization, I had a plurality of meetings with the founder, with the former executive team of that blockchain, with the current executive founders, sorry, the current executive team of that blockchain, multiple meetings with the governor affairs representative of that blockchain, and also had several meetings with a team known as XSY, which was their stablecoin startup that has since been spun out of the organization since I had several meetings with them. So I think that counts for about 6 or 7 meetings over the course of the last year to work with this Wyoming-based organization to determine if they had the capabilities. They were certainly included in our blockchain selection exercise. We went and looked at their capabilities. They met 4 of the 5 binary criteria that we put forth. The one that they did not meet was freeze and seize. They don't have the ability to do interdiction on tokens natively at the blockchain level, nor with anything in a smart contract or token design. There is some incredibly interesting technology that they have on testnets, particularly a piece of technology called Midnight, which would be a privacy-based solution and also would give us the capabilities that we need, but that is currently on a testnet. During our blockchain selection exercise, we were explicitly clear that we need existing and demonstrable technology. This is not something that we can burn budget waiting for technology to be built, completed, et cetera. We need things that are available now. I'll give you an analog with our RFQ process that we just wrapped. Of the 60-ish, and again, this is all, the RFQ process ended yesterday at 5 p.m., so we have not had a chance to go through all of it yet, but of about 60 respondents, I assume there would be about 5 to 10 that won't make it through the qualification process because they simply don't have a current insurance policy in place. right? And when we sign contracts on Wyoming state paper, we need that to be included. So again, we've done a ton of diligence. We've been very thorough. We've talked to representatives in the state of Wyoming and gone through that process with a fine-tooth comb. We also reached out following the completion of our blockchain selection exercise. We released this data a week before our monthly commission meeting in November. We did reach out to the team at Input Output Global. I am in possession of a letter from their COO and government affairs representative that they do not have the technology, confirming that for freeze and seize. And if the Joint Appropriations Committee wants that, I'm happy to share it with you.
Okay, anything else? Senator Driscoll,
Mr. Chairman, follow-up.
are you sure you don't want your mouthpiece to talk for you?
Probably will. That's okay. I guess it looks to me, and you wandered through the timeline with us, and I think you guys have done a phenomenal job between you and I. So I'm going to thank you for what you've done. That being said, it appears a lot of what you've done from what and my interaction's been mild. So catch it back and forth, and it's out of you guys pick winners and losers, and I'm talking with part of the people that were losers and are not very happy about it. It appears the interaction with them, and you just told me part of it, has been somewhat non-existent with some of them as far as the ability for them to do what you've asked. I guess back to a question is, we're a year behind now. Well, initially we should have been issued by now via statute, which we're a full year behind. And now we're into a time frame that all of a sudden we're trying to implement this in about 30 days, it appears. And it looks pretty rushed to me at this point. Is why are we in this immediate rush to try to get a stable token run out the door by January 1? Because that kind of looks to me like you've accelerated timelines, and part of the kickback I've heard from the companies is you set a criteria and you give them 48 hours or 72 hours basically to be able to respond to it instead of taking the time to let them really flesh it out. So explain to me kind of how you've done this and how the timelines have fallen, because at least from what I'm hearing, they really have been asked to respond to things pretty nimbly according to what you guys set, not doing it. Your rules are posted on the website, but they're up for 3 days before for them to respond. Can you kind of walk me through what's happened and where it's at? Am I being misled, or is it actually been rushed this much?
Through the chair, Senator Driscoll, there's a few questions in there that I might push back on a bit. I think the first statement that I have not had, that there's been non-existent conversations with representatives from Wyoming-based blockchain companies is, 6 or 7 meetings over the course of a year with multiple executive teams, multiple build teams, meeting with the founder in person. I would reject the premise that that interaction has been non-existent. Secondly, the statute originally did state that the Stable Token Commission had to endeavor to launch the first Wyoming stable token by December 31st of 2023. You are correct on that capacity. I was onboarded on September 18th of 2023. Anyone who's built technology like this before and understands the largesse of what we're trying to do from a compliance perspective, as much as a technical perspective, understands this is world's first work. There is no guidance in the United States, whether at a state level or the federal level, around how stable tokens should work, whether that's the reserves management that substantiates the value of those tokens, whether that is the technology that determines how tokens are minted, issued, burned, redeemed, any kind of interdiction. We have to build all of that. And that is going to be a robust process because we have one shot to do this correctly. And that is where a lot of the time is being spent. In terms of rushing this out in the next 30 days, I would reject that premise as well. The timeline we have is to get proposals in by January 30th, followed by a month of interviews of those organizations that we deem should be interviewed based on the proposals that we review and receive through an evaluation committee, which will be established, partially commission, partially agency, partially subject matter advisors from our working groups. And then we would look to get contracting done throughout the first half of May and look to roll out an initial blockchain, a Wyoming stable token on a blockchain testnet by the end of Q1. followed by substantive testing, followed by potentially geofencing a first version of this to make sure the activity stays in Wyoming. We stress test the utilization of it, followed by further domestic and international rollouts, and we go from there. But there is a plan here. It is a robust plan. It is a comprehensive plan. And I would kind of reject the premise that we're speeding through things intermittently with long periods of dormancy between them.
So to the thing about rules posted 72 hours and got to turn around something in 24 to 48 hours, is that incorrect?
So, Mr. Chairman, to be clear, when we talk about rules, emergency rules are promulgated by, through the emergency rulemaking process. If we are talking about the period of time in which organizations were able to respond to our blockchain selection exercise, that was a 72-hour turnaround time. That being said, if again, we're talking specifically about IOG, this is a company that purports to have 400 plus people as members of its organization across 50 countries and has I think, $40 billion market cap as a top 10 blockchain. I would expect an organization like that to have the ability to turn around that answer rather quickly.
That goes to Karen. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Senator Driscoll.
One last, I have a letter from them that I know you have that they forwarded to me. I think the committee has it now. It's very specific about where they think it's been wrong, and to the best of my knowledge, that hasn't been answered to them yet. And it appears that it ought to be answered before you go a lot further. That was my whole idea of having you here, was for those ones that were not there, that are crying foul, to at least be able to say why they think it was wrong. And I think that we owe, as a state, we owe it to them to be transparent and to answer the questions that are there. And I'm not sure, I'm hearing your part, but I've seen nothing in writing that answers either one, and there's actually a third one there. But I'd kind of like to see in writing what your answers to them are. It appears to me that you've told us really a good proposal on your end, and I like what I hear. But I also feel like they need to be answered on an honest basis before you move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Apollo.
Would you be referring to the letter dated November 20th of 2024? Through the chair, Senator Driscoll, to quickly read this, page 2, middle of the page. Cardano has not yet deployed a solution that meets the working group's specific criteria of freeze and seize tokens. Signed off by Gerald Maroney, Chief Operating Officer, and Karen Wheeler of Government Affairs. I don't know how much more there is to say beyond that.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
sorry,
Driscoll.
different letter. This one came from I'm not even sure what, because that's how bad I am.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Nethercott.
thank you. For the committee's benefit, for the public's benefit, for all of our benefit, it would be helppful to understand with clarity why we're here, because I think what really is happening is that there's a bidder who was upset that they didn't get it. None of us know with specificity why they didn't get it, but now the commission and the directors being asked to come here and really answer that question, of which none of us have no idea with specificity what those concerns are, and we're having to air this particular dispute between the commission and a dissatisfied bidder, and no one really understands all of those contexts. And so I think for the purposes of a public meeting, either we go through now those complaints and then we hear the response and we have some type of hearing from both sides regarding their complaints and their answers. Otherwise, it's just a very confusing process for everyone and no one knows the meanings of the questions or the answers.
Thank you. And I'll clarify, ICP is where the one I was talking, it's very specific, it's 4 or 5 pages long, the committee has it. Have you answered ICP? Because theirs is very specific.
Mr. Apollo.
Like there's a problem.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, is that an email from a gentleman named Mike Schmidt? Yes, I've had dialogue with him.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Driscoll.
have you sent him anything in writing? Because I asked him to send me replies. They're very specific in what they sent out that they felt was not there, and it's pretty compelling. If you could walk me through that a little bit, and then I'll give up on this, because really all I wanted was for everybody that did not get there, and Senator Nethercott's correct, is that for them to have a fair hearing, they feel like they've been fouled. And my end is not to pick their side or your side, it's to make sure that the process is fair and unbiased.
Through the chair, Senator Driscoll, I and the team had multiple back and forth responses with the ICP. Well, to be clear, you're talking about a company called Pan Industrial. They are a consulting group that sometimes works on a blockchain platform called Definity, which has a token called ICP. They were assessed in our blockchain selection exercise. I do believe that they had the same issues around freeze and seize. Again, they were not a Wyoming-based company, so I do not have that data in front of me this very second, but I'm happy to follow up with you with my own responses to those conversations.
Anyone else? Well,
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yeah. Hey.
Hi.
Mr. Representative Haroldson.
How you doing?
Good morning. Yeah.
Morning. Jeremy Haroldson, House District 4. Mr. Apollo, thank you for joining us today and having this conversation. Wanted two things. One, could you explain that concept of search and seizure, number one? And number two, I think just, could you give me a little of your background, where you're from and kind of what brought you to this place today? Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can.
To add to that, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't want to, it's a very interesting topic, right? We're hearing really exciting things, but this is the Joint Appropriations Committee for supplemental budget hearings. I'm not sure this was properly noticed, one, and certainly Mr. Apollo can answer these questions. And this is all publicly available. But I don't think this is a supplemental budget request, and just for purposes of time, germaneness, appropriateness, and making sure that this Q&A doesn't get out of our lane, I would just urge caution. But those are my comments, thanks.
Senator Salazar? No? Who else do we have? A follow-up, Representative Haroldson? No?
Mr. Chairman, am I able to respond to that?
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you. So, pleasure to meet you.
It's awkward, but talk to the mic.
I've never done one of these in 360 before.
You always get a little uncomfortable when there's somebody behind you like that.
Exactly, right?
And
so
he's
again,
big, too.
Yeah. So by background, I've been in the position of Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission since September of last year, so about 16 months. Before that, I spent my decade-long career with the first half of it in financial services, working in some of the larger banks in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, helping them with restructuring. And then in 2017, formally moved into the world of digital assets to focus on things like tokenized intellectual property, compliant debt security tokens, real-time payouts to content creators, codified royalties via smart contracts, really focused on the efficiency of blockchain technology and how to get recognition for the work that people do and get them paid for it. Moved to Wyoming in 2021 because of the very permissive legislative environment that had been created in the state around blockchain. About 70 bills have been put forth since 2016, 45 of which have passed, which was very exciting, and moved here because of that and because I wanted my own startup to grow in that Wyoming ecosystem. I did not expect to be working for the state government, but with the stable token initiative here, it is so critically important to the nation, right? US dollar hegemony is a concern, US debt is a concern, national security is a concern, and these are all things that come up when we start talking about stable tokens at scale. And actually just last night, stable tokens hit a $200 billion market cap for the first time. And just in the name of time, to segue quickly to the freeze and seize capabilities, because we are talking about these things like national security and the compliance layer that we need to have, we need, as a commission, the ability to freeze and kind of zap from orbit any kind of payment that's sent to malicious actor, the Lazarus Group in North Korea, and I want to be very clear, because a lot of times when we talk about digital assets and blockchain and crypto, this stat comes up that it's funding, dark money and these pools of malfeasance. But if you look at any of the reports from Chainalysis or TRM Labs, which work with federal law enforcement around digital assets, they found that it's well under 1% of all on-chain transactions involve illicit activity. That being said, we need to have something approximating a zero tolerance level, and as such, we need the capability to do what's called freeze and seize. That would allow the commission, under some kind of subpoena process with regulators or our own process, to perform an interdiction on a token in transit or in a wallet. This is something that existing stable tokens do have, particularly the ones from Paxos, which is USDP as the ticker, and PayPal with PYUSD as the ticker. What I think gives the Stable Token Commission a huge leg up in this is we can have a firm legal process behind this that is fair and respects the privacy of the end user, that we will put into rule through our token treatment rules when we put those forward, rather than having things like unilateral interdiction, which is what is currently in place at some of the private companies that do stable token issuance. So that is a very quick and skinny, high-level view of it. Representative Haraldson, I'm more than happy to go through that in detail with you at your leisure, and I'll pause there.
Okay, anyone else? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Apollo, appreciate you being here and educating us on many of these things. Since you brought up this topic of this freeze and seize, and I understand the necessity from one perspective that we don't want this to be used in a nefarious way, but how does this, once we've gone down this path, those people who are most interested in using this type of fiscal tool, how does this give them any confidence that the state will not turn this into something that we control?
Through the chair, Representative Bear, thank you for the question. It's a good one. That's where we need to promulgate a set of rules that is going to define everything from how we receive a subpoena to how we process it to how we do interdiction. And what's important for us is to have something that will be referred to as a multi-signature solution for this. Imagine you're on a submarine, you both have to turn your keys to fire the missiles. It's a digital analog of that. So that would need to be a public process, a multi-party process, and not something where, because I'm having a bad day, I could go look at a transaction and seize it, stop it, freeze it. We're going to be doing all of this in a public forum, which the private incumbents are not. And we think that's going to give us a lot of confidence in the fact that if we have to take these actions, there's going to be a robust trail of evidence behind it to substantiate those actions, rather than us doing it unilaterally or out of spite.
Please, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Apollo, in the days of FISA courts and the kind of lack of public confidence based on government actions, how do we as a state overcome that and still provide the kind of security that you're discussing?
Through the chair, Representative Bear. It's a great question, and I think that comes down to the commission, its rule set, and making sure that we have these public processes in place. I think there's been a lot of obfuscation at the federal level. I mean, we've seen the Weaponization Committee put out on December 5th a report around how, let's say, things like the Bank Secrecy Act and suspicious activity reports have been functionally abused to surveil American citizens. These are things we could build a program around not doing that. And that, I think, is a huge opportunity for us as a state, especially with having our Representative Hageman on the Weaponization Committee, to really draw a line in the sand about how we're going to treat the privacy of financial information, what we want to collect in the first place, and what we're willing to do and act upon, rather than doing things that may, be surreptitiously put behind the scenes and obfuscated instead of overt actions and obvious actions by the commission.
Follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is a monumental task. I hope you're up to that, but I'd certainly like to stay in the loop as to how you foresee mapping that type of software and rulemaking out. Thank you.
Through the chair.
Please, Mr. Apollo. If
I could add one more thing, Representative Bear, and thank you for the comment. I'm more than happy to discuss with you. This project is coming around at a fairly serendipitous time where the technology that's being developed is supportive of these privacy functions. Things like zero knowledge proof, things like distributed homomorphic encryption. These are things that can allow privacy in a public forum, as strange as that may sound, but give Wyoming State the ability to see what's happening and make sure there's no malicious activity occurring. So I'm more than happy to stay in the loop with you on that. And again, we have a Chief Risk and Compliance Officer who's been on the team for about 2 months. Our Chief Information Security Officer just joined on Tuesday. We've already got a lot of thoughts about how the world is forward, and we're more than happy to stay in touch with you. And we would look to socialize any of these rules around reserves management or token treatment with you and the public at large, even before we do a formal public comment period, just to make sure that everyone in the state is aware of what we're building and is comfortable with us rolling it out on behalf of the state of Wyoming.
Anything else? Well, we don't mean to frustrate you. Before you go home and kick the cat, I just, dealing with the legislatures, like years ago, I had a boss that I asked him what his top 3 priorities were, and he named some things, but told me they were all number 1. That's one of the reasons I became self-employed after that. I mean, we want you to move right away, but we want you to throw a wide net and so forth. So, but I would just advise, well, let me give you a little bit of background, at least where I'm coming from on this. You know, a state agency that will remain unnamed years ago gave a contract to an out-of-state firm worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I wrote to them and said, you know, I'd like to know that you just didn't have the firm you wanted picked out. Can you show what you did to reach out to Wyoming firms? And they just kind of woollied me around. And finally, after me being persistent, I got a PDF of page something of the Casper Star Tribune used vehicles. Next to the used RVs was a little ad about they were looking for an advertising agency, a little box ad, and that was their outreach. That's what they gave me as their outreach to Wyoming firms. So once burned, twice shy. Not that you did that, but that's just kind of the perspective that people bring. So I would be prepared to just take a memo and outline what the efforts are that you've made in terms of that outreach, because those questions will persist. I don't know about the RFP process. And we heard from the Secretary of State, he has some frustrations. And I saw when we were looking at software as a committee, I didn't think the RFP process was as good as it could be because it prohibited you from talking to some firms about their capabilities and then them responding to the RFP. So then we started looking at a request for capabilities or some other thing. But you've just got to be careful. As I was listening to you, it reminded me when I was mayor, I had an RFP process. I like to see the finalists, and then we'd kind of make our best judgment that we could justify. And I let go of that, and I had some engineers that did this very rational matrix process. When they were all done, they selected a firm that I went to them and said, every project we've had with this firm has resulted in litigation. How did you select this firm? And they showed me they had this matrix of points. And it was absolutely the wrong thing. I said, there's just no substitute for judgment. And I don't know how much squish room you've got in there for judgment, but you award points here and award points there, and all of a sudden you've got a California firm walking away with the contract, which may be as it is, but if that's the end result, you might look at reopening, because I'm convinced there are some Wyoming domiciled firms that can really do this work. And I do appreciate the pressure that you're under. And so think of it this way, you've more than doubled your workforce since you started. So there you go. The rush, Senator Driscoll, the rush is because the greatest predictor of market success is who's first in the market. That's the rush. And I had hesitance about voting for this because at the time we saw a list of all the other people that are into the stable token business, including the state of Texas and several other states. I was worried that we were late to the game. But there is a reason to hurry, because the opportunity to be a significant part of this market, that door may be closing rapidly. So, Mr. Apollo, best of luck to you, and I feel for you being hectored by the vendors that feel they should have got the work. Now you know what it's like to be mayor in a small town. Okay, anything else from Mr. Apollo? Mr. Apollo, anything in close?
Mr. Chairman, just thank you for your final comments there. I'm happy to let you know I do not have a cat, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just touch on a couple of things, not to over-engineer this, but you did mention some of the concerns around the RFP process and not being able to talk to vendors. That's one of the reasons why we were able to get our own process in place, because if we're creating something where we need technology over here to talk to financial infrastructure over there, we don't want to be at a point 3 months down the road where we've gone through all this interviews and engagement of vendors only to find out their technology is not compatible, right? So we've identified these things way out in front and looked to work around them, which is why some of the work around rulemaking and beyond has taken some time, because we've wanted to proactively identify future problems and remediate those now, not later. Then again, there will be known unknowns, so we'll take those on as they come, but we think we've done a really good job of trying to head off as much of this as possible. Next thing, and actually just the last thing I'll say is, Wyoming as a state is still #1 here when it comes to stable token. Texas has some lightweight back and forth around the gold-backed stable token. It's not being supported in their legislature. We are the first state looking to do this. We are far ahead of anyone else, and I think we really have an opportunity to do something that can be a state-based phenomenon, a global phenomenon, at a time where some of the private incumbents are pulling back from global work because they can't comply with multiple frameworks from all around the world. They have to set up different entities, globally speaking. We have an opportunity as Wyoming to do one issuance and be here, domestic and global. And that is an incredible opportunity for the state. And I thank you for the confidence in me to bring this project forward. And thank you for your time.
All right, well, best of luck to you going forward, and God bless you. Merry Christmas to both of you.
Thank you.
Any other agency callbacks, Don? Oh, public comment okay, any public comment? Hey, welcome. Pull that microphone close and use your outdoor voice. I'm going to turn it on. It'll be green when it's on. Sort of like a traffic light. Harder to operate than a traffic light. Oh, there you go. Oh.
Stay. Okay, here we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Karen Wheeler, and I am here not as a disgruntled bidder who didn't get the RFP. I am here on behalf of Charles Hoskinson and all of his, I actually do government affairs for all of his Wyoming entities, and it is his one entity that you've heard a lot about this morning, Input-Output Global, IOG, and its blockchain Cardano that brings me before you today. And so, Mr. Chairman, I will tell you, I had a lot of comments to say, but based on the conversation this morning, I X'd a lot of them out. So I'm just going to kind of get to the heart of things. So first of all, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to go back to my previous life as the Deputy Secretary of State. And in that role in 2018, when the first blockchain bills came down, I was heavily involved in all of them throughout my career, sometimes not by choice. But what I can tell you about all of those bills, and including the stable token bill, they are all innovative, groundbreaking, and yes, they do set Wyoming apart. And Mr. Chairman, I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Apollo and all of the work he's done since he was hired in September of 2023. And yes, I met with Mr. Apollo, our team has met with Mr. Apollo. He's done yeoman's work in a one-man shop, and I give him great credit for what he's done. However, that being said, I am concerned about the process that went forward. And I can tell you that I have been at every Stable Token Commission meeting since the very first one in May of 2023. And throughout the last year, the process has always been the same. There's always an RFP, request for informations 1 and 2, and IOG did respond to number 2. There was going to be a pre-qualification. And I can tell you that in writing, it did say the RFP would be open to everyone. It's actually in the RFI, page 3 of 8, section 2.2.5.1. I also have it in writing, in an email, that it's open to everyone. So the process has been great, and we've been following it. However, then on November 15th of '24, that process seemed to have changed. A special virtual meeting was called. No public comment was allowed, which is fine. But the meeting was called to approve the criteria for and selection of blockchains that would be in scope for the commission's procurement process. At that time, the executive director announced the 9 blockchains that were considered in scope for the RFP for initial issuance. Commission members that were present did vote to approve it. And the evaluation criteria and scoring rubric that was used and discussed and shown during the meeting, unfortunately, was not available to the public until 8 hours after that meeting. So those of us who were excluded, it took quite a while before we could look at why we were excluded. And so the process went from being an RFP open to everyone to a working group selecting the blockchains for the initial issuance. And that selection was based on information available on public websites. And yes, Mr. Apollo did meet with our team. He did receive information from our team, and I do want to point out that in October of this year, Mr. Apollo did reach out and request answers to 3 questions from the IOG team, and we provided a response. However, in his email to us, he did say that our response was for informational purposes as they progress towards a formal procurement process. Now, had we been told that our response to the questions would be used in the assessment for the initial blockchain selection, we would have provided further clarification. Now, in those 3 questions, he did not ask about frees and sees. However, later on in October, I did reach out to Mr. Apollo and asked to set up a virtual meeting so that he could meet the new Wyoming IOG team. It was a 30-minute virtual meeting, and with all virtual intro meetings, everybody introduced themselves, talked about their background. And Mr. Apollo did ask about frees and sees, and our team did briefly touch on it as well. But again, had we been told that that part of our conversation was going to be used in the assessment of our Cardano chain, we would have provided further clarification. So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, in the end, someone who's been in state government for a really, really long time, the change in the process is what concerned me. I think this could have been a great opportunity for a lot of chains, blockchains, vendors, to be able to respond to an RFP to show their innovative, creative ways that they could meet the stringent criteria that is needed. But they were not allowed to do so. And $1 million question, can we do frees and sees? Well, we are capable of implementing such functionality, but we were not given the opportunity to prove it. If they want it right now, yes, through a smart contract, we could have hurried and put up frees and sees ability. But again, we were not given the opportunity to prove that we could do it or that we had done it. So in closing, I just, like I said, I'm not here as a disgruntled person who didn't win the bid. I'm here as someone who was concerned about the way the process changed suddenly at the last minute and how information was used to evaluate certain entities without them realizing that the information they provided was going to be used in that manner. And so, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Ms. Wheeler? Questions, anyone? Back row? No? Thank you so much. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Any other public comment? Okay, hearing none. What agency is next, Don?
Mr. Chairman, I believe you're at the order of business on executive and judicial letters. I believe the first to present is the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
All right, welcome. And good morning. Trent, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, you, Mr. Chairman. In our SLIB meetings, the light that turns it on is red, and so I can't help but think the legislative branch is trying to trick us a little bit when we come speak to you. But
We are tricky that way.
well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Megan Degenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. With me is Trent Carroll, COO for the Wyoming Department of Education. We are here today to bring you an elected official letter for Agency 205, School Finance. This letter is regarding the necessary budget authority based on the October Craig report to satisfy the K-12 obligations, funding obligations under current law. I would note, again, the October Craig report, previously forecasted revenues were lower than expected, thus the need for this letter. A couple of things I would mention. Number one, these expenditures are not discretionary. These are within the funding model determined by statute. And then secondly, we may see small adjustments based on the January Craig, but this is our most recent projections. The impact is on 2 units within the agency. The first is 4101, which is entitlement payments, and the second is 4102, which is special education. You'll recall that special education is a categorical exclusion, and is funded 100% reimbursement from the state. This is a reflection of higher than anticipated costs from the districts based on FY 2024. The other thing I would note within the letter is the recommended amount for the external cost adjustment. As you're aware, it's been many years since recalibration, I believe about 9 years. And because this is a cost-based model per statute, the external cost adjustment is analyzed each year. Based on the labor market analysis, you will see 3 increases that were recommended, as well as 1 decrease. I would also note that this external cost adjustment was passed by this committee as well as the Joint Education Committee. With that, Mr. Chairman, fairly short and sweet here, would stand for any questions.
Questions? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Superintendent Degenfelder. I just have a few questions about your department. Appreciate you bringing the ECA information and letter. If I may ask those questions about your department. My first question is, what is your scope of, or your span of control? And I'd also like to know, since we've come through the pandemic, what is your office's policy as far as working from home? And what percentage, I guess, would you say your office is actually working from here in the Capitol?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would know as we begin that's Agency 206, so separation from 205, which is education funding, and this is the 206 is the Department of Education. As far as our scope of control, we have done somewhat of an analysis of that. I will say, and then I'll turn to Mr. Carroll if he has the exact number. We've begun to explore that even more as of late. For our agency, our supervisors are only a percentage of their role as supervising. And so we're starting to look into what percentage is that, what is the actual span of control, because I think that can differentiate depending on supervisor. But I'll ask Mr. Carroll if he has the exact number that we've identified.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for the question. I don't have that with me right now. We did study that a few years ago following the Alvarez and Marcel efficiency report. And we calculated it at the time. We've reviewed it since then, but I would like to have a chance to precise those numbers, and I'd be happy to email the committee with that information, maybe even later today.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could continue on the second question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when I came into office in January of 2023, my goal was and still is to create the most efficient, lean, innovative, and effective agency. And so we're constantly working to do that. When I came into office, there was still a hybrid work environment for the Department of Education. And so we have really taken that as an opportunity, really looked at ways that we can leverage that. And so one of the ways which we've been able to do that is to hire folks from all around the state in many of your communities. So we currently have employees that are residing within 15 counties within the state of Wyoming. They're closer to our school districts. They are closer to meeting hubs where we have professional judgment panels or stakeholder groups, education panels. It's also, in that sense, allowed us to attract from a larger pool. rather than focusing on simply the Cheyenne, Northern Colorado area. And so we've gotten some great talent by doing that. I think it's also allowed us to compete a bit more with school districts. We're a very unique agency in that our largest competitor is school districts. More often than not, we cannot compete with salary, let alone summer vacations. And so that can be incredibly difficult. And so we're trying to be as innovative as possible with the limitations that exist in state government to build a very nimble and effective team. I will also say that we recently, and actually we're continuing that conversation, we have a meeting this afternoon with A&I to provide additional cubicle space that we're not currently using. Hoping, particularly with my role on the State Building Commission, how can we use that space and maybe, ideally move away from some lease space. I will say as well, we can confidently say that our travel budget, our costs have decreased. We're still doing that full analysis, knowing that, of course, M&IE has increased within this year, and so doing that math and finding exactly what that is, but that has also been a perk. And so that's currently the makeup, the situation, but happy to walk through any further details with members of the committee.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that seems pretty innovative, having your staff throughout the state. Are you seeing any differences in your transportation costs or reimbursements since you've moved them throughout the state versus what it was before the pandemic?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Representative, I think we can confidently say that we have had cost savings in travel. I think what we need to identify is exactly what those are based on these changes in M&IE, but we can confidently say that there has been a savings there. And so we're looking to really quantify what that is. Another piece of that is just efficiency in terms of meetings. More often than not, we are having back-to-back Zoom meetings, and so we reduce the kind of water cooler chatter and working through that. And so that, I think, has increased our efficiency as well.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I would like to, and look forward to seeing some of those numbers when they become available, as well as your span of control. So if maybe I could get those numbers from you in the next week or so, that would be excellent. Also would like to know, when I think about people working from home, I think of a lot of corporations are kind of running into this, that since the pandemic, people have gotten used to it. It would be a big change to come back to the office. So I know there's some new innovative things for just ensuring that the workload is actually being met, that the hours that are being billed are really occurring. Are you currently using any of this methodology that's out there in the public sector, or do you intend to in the future?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
Representative, it's a very interesting question and one that we've discussed. It can be difficult based on the positions within our department. So you have some folks that are doing standards review committee. And so all day, perhaps they're off their computer very lightly because they're organizing the standards review committee and working through that with stakeholder groups. And so based on the division, it can be very different what that workload looks like. But I think we're willing to look at all of that. I mean, as I said, my goal is to have the most efficient, productive agency, and that's really known across the agency. And so I'm sure happy to talk about what resources we might use.
Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, before we wrap up, I do want to say thank you. Just recognize Trent and Mr. Balo and Shelley Hamill. You probably may or may not be aware, I wrote and said I wanted to learn more about the deaf and hard of hearing facilitators. And by way of background, we added 2 of those positions back that had been eliminated during a downturn. But a number of us had heard from parents of deaf and hard of hearing students that those assistants were really important for integrating those kids into the classroom. And it was very helpful to understand better the work that those folks do and how they help the ordinary classroom teacher deal with a deaf and hard of hearing student. And when I get home, I'm going to be meeting with a local group of parents of deaf and hard of hearing students to hear the struggles that they have. And so I really appreciate Mr. Balo and Trent and Ms. Hamill, and thank them for their time. And I just wanted to pass along my compliments to you as to your staff and how they were able to educate me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have an incredible leadership team at the Department of Education.
All right. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Anything in closing? Any wrap up? All right.
I won't take any more of your time. Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
God bless. Don, any other callbacks?
Mr. Chairman,
Letters. What's the next letter? That's right.
I believe you have Governor's Letter 1 on wildland fires and Governor's Letter number 2 on the shooting complex.
Oh, hey, welcome, Mr. Speaker. Let me see, I've got.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Randall Luthi. I'm the Governor's Policy Director. And maybe just to start off, I'm somewhat pinch hitting today. Our Chief of Staff, Drew Perkins, was called out to a family event. No emergency, but just a nice family event. And so I was volunteered to come before you and talk about these letters. And I'm also not, I may have been amiss earlier in the week.
Who better than you?
Who we'll find out, sir. And I may have been amiss a bit earlier in the week, but Erica Legursky, as you know, has left our office, but she has kindly agreed to continue to assist us through the budget process. So you will all see her for a while, and thank you for that, Erica. So we mentioned Governor's Letters number 1 and number 2. I would suggest that we might deal with number 2 first, because I think it's relatively short, and I don't think you're going to have as many questions as you might have with Governor's Letter number 1.
Sounds like a great idea.
And that is the state shooting complex. And the purpose of the letter was, actually, a member of the legislature requested the governor, as they finished up the process for identifying the state shooting complex and where it was a letter back to the legislature, just reminding them, that they've got that process before them, look at it, and to move forward. And that's basically all that letter does, sir.
Questions for Mr. Luthi regarding Governor's Letter number 2? None? Proceed to number 1.
Well, thank you. So at least my judgment was correct on that part, right? So you have before you Governor's Letter number 1. When the governor spoke to you earlier, as well as the chief earlier, we laid out a plan that talked about the great fires and the number of fires that we have had this year. They were over 2,000, approximately 2,021 fires. It affected over 850,000 acres. Of that, over 596,000 acres were private, and that's about approximately 70%. I bring that to your attention because that's a bit unusual over the years. Frankly, most fires are on federal lands, generally forested areas, often more in the west. But this actually affected mainly 8 eastern counties. So it's a lot more private lands involved. So because of that, the governor started looking at, is there a process that would make sense that would also be able to assist those private landowners as they attempt to rebuild, restore, bring back what they had, and still meet, the state's somewhat fiscal conservative nature, and but also have available for those private individuals. The letter outlines the uses of the fund, and probably the chief one is the idea to combat invasive grasses, invasive species. As many of you know, if you've seen a fire, what is the first thing that comes back? Generally weeds. I happened to get a picture of someone from Campbell County just this week who had much of their pasture land destroyed. And she sent me a nice picture of what it looked to me as one of the healthiest crops of Canadian thistles I've ever seen. So again, that's a good example of what some of the first things that come back. So invasive grasses is likely to be one of the bigger parts of that. Maybe there'd be more than one treatment. And we also want to be able to, on state lands and those cases where there are federal lands, be able to coordinate those efforts. There'll also be an effort for watershed restoration, and that's largely, as you know, watersheds are often willows at low area. There may also be getting close to certain towns. There was area fires are relatively close. Restoration and also habitat restoration on private state lands. There may also be some possibilities for infrastructure replacement, including fences, possibly irrigation facilities that were destroyed, possibly even an outbuilding or two, but we believe that will be pretty minor should there be any of that. And of course, the big category might be other that we're just not aware of. If I were you, the first question would be, where did you get that cost of $130 million? That's quite a chunk. And members of the committee, I appreciate that. It's based upon our best estimates that we gathered from people in the Department of Ag, some private individuals, the use of those people, Bob Budd, who does the Wyoming WWNRT Natural Resources Trust. We thought it appears to be an approximate figure about $46 million in fence repair, fence replacement, probably $145 million in invasive, probably $116 million in restoration costs, and probably about $35 million in erosion. And frankly, members of the committee, those are exactly what I said they are, estimates. They're the best that we have right now. Chances are, as time goes on, as more people survey, look at what it's going to cost, those will probably be sharpened up somewhat. So overall, restoration efforts could be in the neighborhood even of, if you looked at the cost of what it takes to reclaim coal land, it may vary. If you add and then extrapolated that across, it's probably even much higher. So that's where we got the figure of 130. I won't even pretend to tell you that it's accurate. It is an estimate. The plan itself is meant to be a last stop for those people that could use those kinds of services. We certainly indicate that we certainly believe that those who have insurance will use it. Those that qualify for federal and other loans and grants will use them, and then will come to us. We have suggested rather loosely the following process. We believe that this would be very helpful if it was routed through Director Bud's shop, the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resources Trust Office. We believe that could be helpful for a number of reasons. First of all, is that's what they do. Their board is well experienced. The staff, although small, is well experienced in restoration efforts, restoration projects. And this is where we now come and I ask for your help on that. What we were envisioning at the time is that through that Director Budd and the governor could put together a steering committee, likely of individuals from his shop, from Department of Ag, from Department of DEQ, probably the Wyoming stock growers, and it probably might even make a sense or two to have one or two legislators involved. So then maybe not, who knows? But that is something we really would like to work with you on how that may or may not work. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I suspect you might have a question or two.
Representative Walters,
Thank you,
leading
Mr.
off
Chairman.
the parade.
On the first page of the letter in the second paragraph, it discusses Wyoming's one of 5 states without a state-funded disaster aid recovery program. In those other states, if you are aware, what does their disaster recovery program do? What kind of expenses does it cover? Just broadly speaking, I know you're not going to be a professional in all states, all aspects, just broadly speaking.
Mr. Chairman, this may be the advantage of where I'm pitch hitting, and I will get back to you with that information. I really do not know it. Is there a time frame you would like me to respond? Okay.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Just to follow up on that, Don, I think that what we'd like to do is have LSO coordinate with the governor's office and see if you can't have LSO put together a memorandum of what those look like, what they're composed of, what their qualifications are, how they're implemented, and how they're funded, so.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, would be happy to coordinate.
Randall, when Chief Perkins was making his presentation, he noted that one of the concerns that we often have with government programs is once they're out, and so they get down the line, they run out of money, and then there's the rest of the line that's waiting, and that made sense. But then when I read through this, we got 131 million, and you're looking at 400 million in invasive species potentially. So it seems like either we're to accomplish what you're hoping to do, this 131 million is underfunding, or do you feel like the other funding or grant disaster relief will be sufficient enough to, hopefully sufficient enough that between the two we'll have enough?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, excellent question. I mentioned the 130 is really a guess, but when you look at the cost of what it could be, we certainly didn't want to go to that extent because of the unknowns that you very well mentioned. There are several federal programs that offer disaster relief. Whether or not they will be funded is even a question right now because of the other hurricanes and other things that's happened in the rest of the nation. Some of the invasive species programs conducted by the Game and Fish and WWNRT may, actually be on top of some of this. So there's no use for double counting. So once again, that's where that steering committee could help us with identify that.
Please.
So then the other conversations we've had over I guess we have some benefit of the CARES Act and the ARPA funds, is that getting, as simple as it may seem, getting some of that money out the door is a more complex process sometimes than we anticipate. And so getting 131 million out the door would maybe beg the question, is that how much you need this year? Or the reverse side of that is, with 131, I would assume then that it would be not ongoing, but it would carry over into the biennium until those funds are used.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lardis, once again, you're ahead of me on an excellent answer. This is a one-time funding request. We would ask that it would be able to be carried over because we probably will not address those needs within this fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you. In looking at page 2 of the letter, in item number 4 in that top paragraph, I'm just curious as to what may be being contemplated with provide limited and targeted assistance to impacted families and businesses. And the question I have there really is insurance coverage, and are we doing opportunity loss expenses, right? Or can we expound a little bit more on that concept?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Nethercott. I believe you actually, if I could actually, use your help, I'd like to actually follow up on exactly what you said. Some of this we probably don't know, but we talk about businesses that will there be an actual loss to their physical business? Some of that we don't know. We want insurance, of course, to make sure those are possibilities. Those areas where the fires burn very close to town, we're not sure if there's some additional watershed areas or recreational areas that may or may not be affected. Again, this is somewhat of a broad concept, We just didn't want to limit anything in this letter.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up?
Thank you. And I appreciate that, particularly for where the state is now and trying to just get their arms around the extent of the damage, that you don't want to be too limiting while trying to be appropriately sideboards. You know, from my perspective, for state dollars jumping into some of these disasters, I'm worried that perhaps we're creating a precedent that the state will always come in and provide a remedy for all things to all people, and that may not be sustainable. I certainly support the need to do remediation efforts for all lands concerning invasive species, because those don't know property lines or property boundaries, right? And that affects the state in total. You know, wildlife and watersheds, that is a statewide concern and requires a statewide solution that private parties may not be responsible for. But when we start talking about, you know, businesses that may or may not be affected, and then us providing a financial solution every time, or creating that precedent, I think requires great caution. And we probably need to slow down, as tempting as it is to just fix it. Because I just want to make sure that personal responsibility comes first, with no expectation that the state will always be in a position to make everyone whole for all damage that could occur.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, excellent points. That's precisely why we bring this to you, for those kinds of advice.
Anyone else for Mr. Luthi? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Luthi. Couple of things. I'd like to first of all follow up with Senator Nethercott's line of questioning. One of the things that would be helpful for the public and for this body would be to differentiate, of the 70% that was burned that is state and private lands, how much is private and how much is state. That would be helpful, especially when we're looking at mitigating invasive species and those costs, just to understand, you know, how much of the funding is taking care of the private sector, how much of it is just us taking care of that which we're responsible for taking care of. And then you had mentioned that the estimates are based on the reclamation processes for mining, which multiple stage, many years to accomplish that. That seems like a safe way to do it, because you'd certainly be covering any potential costs with that, but it does seem rather extensive for an estimate. So I just would like to hear more about that, how that estimate came about. And along that same line of thinking, the governor has asked for additional borrowing authority, which I'm very intrigued with, because as Representative Larson mentioned, you know, we don't know what we're going to come into, and that would certainly be a very flexible way of dealing with this remaining year in our biennial budget. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not only phoning a friend, I'm reaching for.
All right. So I would like to explore that further with your office, you know, whether more borrowing authority and less funding of unknown future costs would be a good way to approach this. I'd just like to have that conversation with you in the future.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Incoming Chairman, thank you for that, those questions. One of the reasons I have white hair is probably short-term memory loss. I actually did have the figures of state and private lands, which are just not coming to me, but I will get them to you right away. When you mentioned the borrowing authority, currently the borrowing authority requested in the governor's budget is for the suppression or the putting out of fires. So that's what that one would be used for. And it's just replacing that ability to, well, we borrowed, I think it was 20 million, is that correct? And we would just ask for the ability to replace that. So it's available again, should we need it. Again, your points on reclamation are well made. You know, when we were looking for estimates, we were trying to get a wide variety. I agree with you, those are probably much higher than what it would actually be, and that's why we don't have $400 million request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My recollection is that the borrowing authority, the governor's office has requested that we expand that from 20 million, I'm sorry, to 30 million. That's my understanding. And I like that approach because it certainly gives the governor the ability to carry on should we have more of these unprecedented fires. We clearly had an unprecedented summer, spring, fall, with the number 2 and number 3 most expansive fires in state history. So no idea what we're going to run into in the next year, but we've got to get through this biennium. So expanding that authority, and at the same time, although it wasn't asked for by your office, it's become clear to me that that authority is very limited to fire suppression. I don't see why it couldn't be expanded to other potential emergencies, so long as it was along the same lines. Does that make sense to you, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Incoming Chairman, I would never want to argue with you if you should like to give the governor more money or authority with that. But again, thank you for that, and certainly we will work with you on that.
I was waiting to see if you said no. It doesn't make any sense.
Well,
You're too smart for that.
Well, thank you for that compliment. I'm sure I'm not, but yeah, at least I slipped over that one, right? Yeah.
Anything else from Mr. Luthi? Anyone? All right, Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only question I might have left is, as we proceed and talk about possibly a budget footnote, who would you like us to work with? You're kind of in an unusual situation right now.
I'm looking at 2 incoming chairs. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to work with you. I think my co-chair in the future will be happy to work with you on footnotes.
All right. Thank you so much for that advice. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right, Merry Christmas,
and thank
Randall.
you all for your efforts, and Merry Christmas to you. Many of you don't know that actually Chairman Kinski and I were in the same law school class. Now, he's aged far better, and he was also, I looked up to him in many reasons in that class, and that's largely because he was farther up, much higher than I was in ranking, but thank you.
No, I sat in the back because I didn't want to be called on because I was rarely prepared, and you always were.
I'm glad to see your memory has not failed you. Yeah.
Okay. Don, any other letters? That's it, isn't it, on letters?
Mr. Chairman, that is it on letters. Just a quick educational item. These last 3 letters apply to the existing rules. They may or may not apply to the incoming rules of this committee, which is a way to funnel additional requests of agencies and elected officials beyond their original submission in November. You specifically provide for this letter-making process. In addition, Rule number 10 of the committee provides a funneling process of additional legislative requests. Specifically, select committees and interim committees may make requests, and I believe I left inadvertently one out yesterday evening. You have 3 of those letters that the incoming committee will consider during markup in January. One from the Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife Committee on Game and Fish reduced license fees. One from the Select Natural Resource Funding Committee for invasive plant species, essentially supporting the governor's rec of $11 million. And then finally, from the Joint Transportation and Military Affairs Interim Committee, they write JAC an expression of support for Homeland Security funding and specifically the state emergency resources. I believe the amount in that letter is $5.775 million. Mr. Chairman, that's exhausts the letters on your agenda.
Okay. It says break. We're not going to take a break. We don't have draft legislation. Looks like that. Yeah, party's over, Senator Driscoll says. Anything else? Am I missing anything before we wrap up? Senator Larson?
We do, Mr. Chairman, kind of some sentimental things that Senator Salazar and I, if you would give us time, Karen, if you've got those.
Please. Sentimental.
If you'll give us a minute.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe those are housekeeping. You can continue on YouTube or adjourn at your discretion.
I believe there being no further business, we should, well, what wrap-up items do you have while they're doing this, Don? Let's do that on the record.
Mr. Chairman, just an acknowledgement to all members, you received your vouchers and encouragement to submit those to the current chairman once those are filled out. We will send those out to those participants who were online. And beyond that, we will work as LSO staff with the incoming chairs to schedule their meetings in January for the first week of the legislative session. Recall that the Joint Appropriations Committee is the only committee that is not an interim committee and continues its service year-round. And so the traditional practice is that you would meet in the first 2 weeks of that session, receive the January Craig report, obviously have an opportunity for additional call-ins or call-backs at your discretion, and markup of the budget. The first order of business, just to prepare you, as I recently read from the current rules of the committee, would be to establish the parameters for working forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I have no further housekeeping items.
Mr. Co-Chair, you have anything? All right, well, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Meeting is adjourned.